incidents. We're going to get more on this now. We're joined by Arsalan Iftikhar, international human rights lawyer and author of Scapegoats, How Islamophobia Helps Our Enemies and Threatens Our Freedoms. He is joining us live from Washington, D.C. Mr. Iftikhar, always good to talk with you on Al-JAZEERA. We've been talking about the rise in hate crimes against Muslims and other minorities, both in the UK and the US, where you are. So what do you make of British Prime Minister Theresa May coming out and calling what's happened in Finsbury Park? British authorities, in fact, as our correspondent was saying just in 8 minutes after the attack, calling it a terrorist incident.
Well, Elizabeth, for millions of Muslims living in the West, we said it's about time. For so many years, there have been coordinated attacks against Muslims, Arabs, and South Asians all across the West. That was never, called acts of terrorism. And so, we finally, for the first time ever, have seen this double standard be lifted. And it's important to keep in mind, more importantly, that what we saw in London at the Finsbury Park mosque is not an isolated incident. As you mentioned, there was an attack in Portland, Oregon, where a white supremacist killed 2 men on a city bus after yelling anti-Muslim screeds. In Quebec City, Quebec, a few months ago, there were 6 Muslim worshippers who were murdered in cold blood by a white supremacist named Alexander Bissonnette. In 2015, we had 3 Muslim students at the University of North Carolina who were murdered in their apartment by a neighbor who had long posted anti-Muslim and Islamophobic tirades. And so it's about high time that these acts of terrorism are called terrorism, and not only called terrorism when Muslims are the perpetrators.
Exactly. I mean, why do you think there has been such a reluctance to call attacks by non-Muslims terrorist incidents? Because again, in the US, where you are, the research center New America shows that there have been a lot more people killed since 9/11 by, non-Muslims, white supremacists, than they have been by Muslims. Yet these incidents most often aren't labelled terrorist incidents.
Yeah, because that's a very good point that you make, Elizabeth, and that's because, the majority population doesn't want to see, criminal acts of mass murder committed by people who look like them to be labeled acts of terrorism. They're very quick to label acts of terrorism against people who are olive-skinned, with ethnic-sounding names. And so, again, this is something that Muslim public intellectuals, thought leaders, activists, and religious scholars have been talking about since 9/11 is the term terrorism, sadly, in our Western socio-political zeitgeist has been co-opted to only apply when brown Muslim men commit acts of mass murder, and not when, white right-wing supremacist terrorists do the same.
And how important is it that that change is led, from the top, from the highest of authorities? Because, you had former FBI Director James Comey, who refused to call the Charleston massacre in 2015 terrorism. That's when a white supremacist, Dylan Roof, killed 9 black churchgoers, and the FBI Director wouldn't call it terrorism.
And there is that double standard, and Elizabeth, I called that out in the media, that the Charleston shooting should have been called an act of terrorism. As you said, Dylan Roof, a noted white supremacist, walked into the AME Emmanuel Baptist Church in Charleston, South Carolina, proceeded to sit in Bible study with parishioners for over an hour, and then proceeded to assassinate 9 innocent African Americans, including one state senator for whom he had asked for by name. Now, if a Muslim man had walked into a white church and done the same thing, that would have been called terrorism in about 4 seconds. And so again, that's what we're talking about is, it's finally, it's a little bit of a relief to see that Theresa May, Sadiq Khan, as mayor of London, are calling this act an act of terrorism. And hopefully, when we see more Islamophobic hate crimes of mass murder that occur around the West, that they will start to call them terrorism as well.
All right, Mr. Iftikhar, thank you very much for your thoughts on that. Arsalan Iftikhar joining us live from Washington, D.C. Thank you.
Thank you.